The October chill cut straight through my worn-out cardigan as I hurriedly guided Noah toward the entrance of Portland General Hospital, his tiny fingers clinging tightly to my hand, while his oversized Spider-Man backpack bounced with every step, looking bigger than his small shoulders could ever carry. The automatic doors opened and washed over us with that cold, indifferent hospital air, laced with the familiar scent of antiseptic that had become an unwelcome shadow in our lives. 3 months of chemotherapy, yet every time we walked in, it still felt like stepping onto an invisible battlefield. "Mama, can we have hot chocolate later?" Noah asked, his voice bright in a way that felt almost out of place in a place this heavy. "If you behave during my appointment," I whispered with a forced smile, squeezing his little hand. "Remember the rules, right? Sit still, draw pictures, and do not bother the grown-ups," Noah recited in a steady voice, like a tiny soldier repeating orders, his worn sneakers dragging across the polished floor. The right shoe had started to tear at the toe, something I knew I would not be able to replace anytime soon. We reached the oncology reception desk, where the clerk gave Noah a strained smile. Everyone here knew our story. Claire Bennett, 28 years old, stage 2 ovarian cancer, single mother, no family, no miracles, just a 5-year-old boy who sat through every treatment when I had no one else to watch him. And today felt even worse than the others. After signing in, I led Noah to the familiar row of waiting chairs, his hand never leaving mine. I tugged his knit hat down a little further to cover his ears, red from the cold. My son always tried to act braver than his age, though he was still just a child who loved fairy tales, who drew princesses, castles, and sorrowful kings searching for the families they had lost. "Are you cold, Noah?" I asked, adjusting his coat. He shook his head, lips pressed together as if he wanted to prove he truly was brave. "It is okay, Mama. I will draw a picture for you later." I smiled, but my heart felt unbearably heavy. On days like this, I wished more than anything to be healthy enough to run with him again, or at least work extra hours to keep up with rent, hospital bills, and medication. The clerk called my name, saying the doctor needed to see me privately before treatment. A bad feeling tightened in my chest. In the consulting room, I bent down and kissed the top of Noah's head. "Draw Mama something really beautiful, okay?" He nodded and opened his box of crayons, most of them worn down to stubs. He sat in a small chair beside me, his legs dangling far from the floor. "Doctor." Miller walked in, his face calm in a way that only made my fear grow sharper. He opened my file and let out a soft breath I had never heard from him before. "Claire, your insurance just sent a notice, and they have denied coverage for the advanced treatment plan we were counting on." The room tilted. "No, you said that treatment was my best chance." I kept my voice low, conscious of Noah sitting right there. The doctor nodded. "It is. But without insurance, the cost is nearly $200,000. I could not speak. All I could see was Noah waiting for me outside the chemo room, his wide, dark eyes watching every breath I took. I had to live. I had to stay. "Mama." Noah tugged at my sleeve, his eyes worried. "Are you okay?" I forced a smile and brushed his cheek. "I am fine." But my hands trembled so badly I had to clasp them together. When the doctor stepped out to give me a moment, I pulled Noah into my arms. His hair smelled faintly of crayons and children's soap, and it made my throat tighten. I needed to be strong for him, but all I could feel was a darkness closing in around me, thick and cold and endless. And I did not yet know that at the far end of Portland General's crowded hallway, a powerful man would soon walk in, and our lives would begin to shift in ways I could never imagine. If the moment you pictured me holding Noah's hand in that cold consulting room made your heart tighten the way mine did, please subscribe to our channel, like and share this video, so we have the strength to bring more stories filled with hope and depth every day. And where are you watching from? Leave a comment with your city or country so I can see how far our journey has reached across this wide world. Dr. Miller returned a few minutes later, the file still in his hands. He sat across from me, eyes full of concern. "Claire, I know this is a devastating blow, but you need to understand the full picture. The new treatment has a higher chance of stopping the spread of your cancer, especially with how aggressive your type is. But without insurance, the cost must be covered entirely out of pocket." I nodded slowly, feeling as though I were listening to someone else's story, not my own. "What is the amount exactly?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. $197,000, he said softly, as if whispering it would make it hurt less. I let out a hollow laugh, the sound of despair. I have $3,000 left in my account, most of it for rent and next month's bills, he exhaled, and I could see he cared for me not just as a patient but as a human being. We can file an appeal, request a review, but the process takes time, and time is not on your side, Claire. I looked over at Noah, busy coloring a dragon and muttering lines for the characters under his breath. Every soft laugh from him tore through me. If I do not take the treatment, what are my chances? I asked. 30% lower than with the advanced therapy, he answered. I closed my eyes, seeing Noah growing up without me, his first day of school, adjusting his graduation gown in the mirror, maybe becoming a father someday, all without me there. I will not let that happen, I whispered, almost like a vow. Is there any support program? Charities? Patient? Funds? We are searching, but most have long waiting lists. Claire, I know you are strong and independent, but sometimes asking for help is not weakness. I laughed softly, my eyes burning. Do you know I once believed I was smart enough to avoid situations like this, that if I worked hard and planned carefully, I would never have to beg for the chance to live another year? He stayed quiet, giving me space. When I finally looked up, he spoke gently. Claire, if there is anyone in your life you can call for help. I cut him off. There is no one. What about Noah's father? He asked cautiously. I clenched my hands until my nails stung my palms. It was a mistake. One night, I do not even know his full name, a charity gala at a 5-star hotel. I was serving tables, he was a guest. He disappeared before sunrise. All I had was a first name and a foolish dream that a one-night encounter might turn into something more. I do not know who he is, Dr. Miller. I even went back to the hotel, asked the event organizers. No one would give me anything. It has always been just me and Noah. The doctor nodded slowly, understanding without judgment. He stood and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. I believe you will find a way, Claire. And if there is anything the hospital or I can do, even the smallest thing, tell us. I nodded, unable to form the words thank you. When he stepped out, I stayed seated, gripping Noah's hand tightly, as though letting go would send me spiraling into an endless void. And I had no idea that in just a few minutes, someone from a past I thought was gone forever would walk through that door, and my life would never be the same again. I had just stood up, ready to take Noah back toward the treatment area, when the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway and made me instinctively turn my head. A group of men in dark suits were striding through the oncology wing with a determined pace, their faces stern, moving as if the entire hospital were merely a stage, built for them. They walked quickly enough to signal urgency, but not so fast as to appear rushed. At the center of the group was a tall man with broad shoulders, dark hair touched with strands of silver at the temples, dressed in a charcoal suit pressed to perfection in every line. There was something about him both too polished and too different for anyone to ignore. Nurses and doctors subtly stepped aside, some glancing at him with caution, others offering stiff, reluctant nods of respect. I found myself frozen in place, barely conscious enough to keep hold of Noah's small hand. My son looked up, wide-eyed, watching the group as they passed. When the man approached the reception desk, the overhead light struck his face in a way that jolted something deep inside me. There was a familiarity there, sharp and painful. "Mama," Noah whispered, tugging at my hand with a quiet certainty. "Mama, I know him." I leaned down and whispered back, "No, sweetheart, you're mistaken. He's just someone passing by." But Noah shook his head, his gaze locked on the man's silhouette. "No, you told me about him. He's the king, the one from the fairy tales you told." My heart tightened as if gripped by an invisible hand. "No, honey, what are you talking about?" But before I could stop him, Noah slipped from my grasp like a streak of wind. My 5-year-old, in his old red coat, ran straight across the hallway toward a group of powerful men without a flicker of fear. I panicked, sprinting after him, calling out his name in desperation. "Noah, come back here right now!" But it was too late. My son was already standing right in front of the man, staring up at him with shining eyes, as though he had stepped directly out of one of the stories I used to soothe him to sleep. Noah stared at him, And then his gaze stopped on a faint scar near the man's left eyebrow, the tiny detail I had once described in my tale about the lost king. My son stepped forward, hesitant but hopeful. "You have the king's scar. You're the one Mama talked about, aren't you?" The man froze, as if someone had rooted him to the floor. His entire group stopped in unison. One man with a shaved head moved forward, but the central figure halted him with a single flick of his hand. The main man turned slowly, his eyes searching. And when his gaze reached mine, the world seemed to stop mid-breath. His face, cold and immovable just seconds before, softened, paled, shattered with disbelief. "Claire." My name slipped from his lips, hoarse and disbelieving, as though he had just found something long lost. His hand trembled, and the pen he was holding fell to the floor with a sharp clatter that cut through the silence. I reached Noah, pulled him quickly into my arms, my breath shallow and frantic. "I'm so sorry," I blurted out. "He's just an imaginative child. It's nothing." The man did not take his eyes off me. The shock on his face shifted into something deeper, something tangled between pain, recognition, and the quiet ache of regret. I took Noah's hand, ready to walk away, when the man spoke, his voice low and steady. "Wait." I froze, my feet refusing to move as if held by invisible threads. His eyes flicked from me to Noah and back. "How old is he?" I tightened my grip on Noah's hand, instinct rising like a shield. "That's none of your concern." The man did not move. His voice came out rough, broken. "He is 5. It was not a question. It was a declaration that hollowed out the air around us. How could he possibly know? A nurse approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Westbrook, your wife is waiting in the private treatment area." The words sliced through me. Westbrook. Julian Westbrook. A name I had never known 6 years ago. He had a wife. Of course he did. A man like that would have an entire world built around him. A world where I never belonged. Julian turned toward his assistant and ordered quietly, "Deal with that later. I have something more important to handle." As he stepped toward me, I felt the air thin around my lungs. Everything I had tried to bury for 6 years one night that had rewritten my life, a name I never learned, a dream I never should have had, rose up as if pulled back from a grave, and I could no longer run from any of it. I stood there clutching Noah, my heart slamming against my ribs like I had been dragged straight back into a summer night 6 years ago, the night that had changed everything. Dim lights at the Fairmont Hotel in downtown Portland. Soft jazz drifting from the balcony where the live band played, the scent of wine mingled with lavender arranged across the lobby. I had been a temporary server, balancing cocktails and trays of canapés at a charity gala hosted by a major financial firm. I was exhausted after 3 consecutive shifts, my feet numb inside worn-down soft-soled shoes, my hair messily tied back, my makeup faded by sweat. And then I saw him standing among the elite crowd in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, a glass of scotch in his hand, his expression cool, detached, as though he did not belong there at all. He did not smile, did not linger in conversation, simply stood like a stone tower rising from a sea of people. But when I passed by with a tray of champagne, his eyes stopped on me, not the way wealthy men glance at a waitress. It was a look that stripped past pretense, as though he saw something in me I had long forgotten. He followed me out to the garden behind the hotel after the event, where I had gone to breathe, to pull off my shoes, to sit on the cold stone steps wishing morning would never come, so I would not have to return to my lonely rented room. I remembered his voice when he spoke for the first time. "Tired?" I nodded without turning. He sat next to me, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. We talked, without hesitation, without awkwardness. He told me he hated the artificial polish of galas. I told him about my dream of becoming a children's book illustrator, before life pushed me into waitressing. He did not say his name. I did not ask. Maybe because I assumed he would leave like everyone else. Maybe because I did not think I would remember. But I remembered. I remembered his eyes, his low voice, the way he kissed me among the lavender blooms, as if the world had disappeared. We left the garden together. I led him to the tiny staff sleeping room, where I had been allowed to stay because there were no late buses. A cramped, white-walled room with a creaky single bed that, somehow, became a sanctuary for something soft and fleeting and unnamed. We never exchanged names. Only glances, quiet breaths, and 2 broken lives brushing against each other in a rare moment untouched by reality. When I woke the next morning, he was gone. No note, no phone number, only a folded white hotel napkin left at the head of the bed. I kept it for a year like a foolish relic before throwing it away on a night when my belly had started to swell and I no longer had the courage to whisper hope into the dark. And now, staring at the face standing before me, everything I had forced myself to forget surged back with merciless clarity. Julian Westbrook. He had a name, a face, a kingdom of power. And I, Claire Bennett, had a child and a tumor growing inside me. I had never prepared for this moment. I swallowed hard and faced him, trying to steady my voice. I did not know who you were 6 years ago. I knew nothing. Julian nodded, pain visible in every line of his face. I left my card, Claire. Right on the table by the bed. I thought you would find it. My body went still. There had been no card. I had checked. I had searched every corner. His expression tightened. Someone may have taken it. I had someone watching me back then, someone who tried to control everything. I am not sure, but I looked for you. For 6 months, I sent people to every hotel, every charity event, every temporary staff list with any woman named Claire. No one would give me anything. I thought you did not want to be found. I shook my head, feeling as if I had stepped into a dream turned inside out. I got pregnant after that night, and I thought I had been abandoned. I glanced at Noah, staring at Julian with innocent curiosity. I thought I was alone. Julian turned to Noah, his eyes losing their coldness. He is my son, isn't he? I said nothing. But silence was enough. And in that moment, we both understood that the past was not just memory. It was the beginning of something about to change all 3 of our lives. I did not know how long we stood there, only that the air around us thickened as though the entire hospital held its breath for our next words, our next movements. Julian remained in front of me, silent, his gaze fixed on Noah before returning to me with a depth that felt like a plea. What could I say, when words felt too small for the truth rising between us? I did not nod, nor did I shake my head. I simply looked down at Noah and placed my hand gently on his hair. Do you want to go back to the waiting seats, sweetheart? Noah shook his head. I want to stand with you, Mama. I lifted my eyes and met Julian's, forcing my voice to steady. Yes, he is your son. I never meant for you to know. I had no way of contacting you. And by the time I realized I was pregnant, I tried to find you. But I had nothing, not your full name, not your world. I thought it was just one blurred night I needed to forget, but I never forgot. Julian nodded slowly, eyes filled with both understanding and hurt. I know, and I never forgot either. He took a deep breath as if holding himself together. I spent 6 years looking for you, Claire, but I never imagined I also had a child. He looked at Noah again. He really does look like me. Claire, why didn't you try asking the hotel or the organizers? I did. I cut in. They refused to give out private guest information unless I had a legal reason. I was just a pregnant girl who did not know a name of the father. Who would believe me? Who would help? Julian stepped closer, then stopped when he saw me pull Noah instinctively toward me. Claire, he whispered, I am not here to take him from you, but please, let me. I shook my head. I do not know who you are, Julian. I do not know what you do, where you come from, or why this entire hospital freezes when you walk through it. But what I do know is that I raised Noah on every dollar I earned in tips. I am not asking for your pity, and I do not need you arriving now like some late hero. My voice wavered despite my best effort. Julian did not move, did not argue. He simply stood there with a quiet kind of endurance that made me feel like I was the one being unfair. His voice dropped, low and sincere. I did not know I had a son, Claire. If I had known, I would not have lived each year as a man half alive. I thought you forgot me. I exhaled sharply, unable to meet his gaze. Your wife, I said softly. She is waiting in the rear's private treatment area. Shouldn't this end here? Julian was silent for a long moment before speaking, calm as water flowing over stone. Teresa and I have been separated for 3 years. That marriage had no love. It was arranged between 2 families. She is here today for a different reason. I will not let her interfere in this. This is between you and me, and our son. Noah looked up at me, his eyes bright. "Mama, is he really my dad?" The simple question cut straight through my heart. I pulled him into my arms and nodded slowly. "Yes, sweetheart. He is your father." Julian closed his eyes, and when he opened them, something fundamental had shifted. The powerful man surrounded by guards was gone. All that remained was a father meeting his child for the first time in a cold hospital hallway, his emotions 6 years overdue and crashing into him all at once. And in that moment, I could not tell whether I feared him, resented him, or was only struggling to hold on to the little world Noah and I had built before everything changed forever. That afternoon, I returned to the diner where I worked as if nothing had happened, as if that chaotic morning had been nothing more than a strange dream lasting only as long as a medical appointment. I changed into my uniform behind the counter, tied my hair back neatly, and began wiping down surfaces, checking receipts, carrying drinks to customers just as I had done hundreds of times before. Noah sat in his usual corner at the end of the counter, coloring in his dog-eared sketchbook and nibbling on the cookies. Darlene, the evening shift's head cook, always secretly saved for him. I knew everyone in the diner wanted to ask what was wrong. I walked indifferent not because of my clothes or my hair, but because of the way I moved, the look in my eyes, something people who have been deeply hurt can recognize instantly in one another. But no one asked, not even Darlene. Not until the bell over the door chimed and I looked up, my heart nearly stopping. Julian Westbrook stepped into the diner with his usual composed presence, but this time without a single bodyguard. Just him, in a dark gray button-down shirt, with the sleeves neatly rolled to his forearms, his hair combed back, and his gaze searching for me with purposeful clarity. Darlene stood behind the counter, frowning at the stranger entering as though he were stepping into someone's private backyard. I could see her assessing him, glancing at me with thinly veiled caution. He walked to a table near the corner, sat down and placed his hands quietly on the table. He did not order. He did not speak. He simply waited. Darlene arched an eyebrow at me, as if asking whether she should call the police. I gave a small shake of my head, set down my cleaning cloth, and walked toward him. "How can I help you?" I asked in the polite tone of someone serving any other customer. "What would you like?" Julian looked directly at me, his eyes never drifting for even a second. "Are you all right?" I took a slow breath. "I'm working. If you're not ordering anything, I'll have to ask you to leave. A coffee," he said, then paused. "And a few minutes to talk." I nodded, walked away to pour the coffee, my hands trembling with anger and something else, something fragile and tangled I did not want to name. When I returned, I set the cup in front of him without sitting down. Julian slid a small cream-colored envelope across the table toward me. I did not take it. "What is this?" He lifted his gaze, calm and steady. "Information, and an invitation." I frowned. He continued. "Inside is the address to my estate in the Willamette Valley, about 2 hours from here. There is space there, privacy, safety for you and Noah. Nothing is required. It is only an invitation." My heartbeat thudded violently, as if it wanted to break free of my chest. "What do you think this is?" I asked. "An invitation to move in with you? A chance to fix everything with money?" He shook his head. "No, I do not think that. I know I have no rights here, but I want to be present. For my son. And, if you allow it, for you as well." My throat tightened painfully. I had lived long enough to know when to cut something dangerous out of my life, but I had also lived long enough to recognize desperation my own. I had no support, no way out, and my child needed something more stable than a cold apartment and a mother whose strength was running out. Still, I kept my voice cold. "What did you do after finding out about Noah?" Julian straightened in his seat. "I called my attorney, my private doctor, my logistics team. I reviewed your entire medical history, and I sent an anonymous endowment to the hospital to initiate the advanced treatment plan for you. I am not asking for gratitude. I only did what should be done." I stood still, my heart churning, heavy as if stirred by invisible hands. "I do not need pity. You know that." "No," Julian replied quietly. "I do not pity you. I love you. I have never stopped thinking about you." I blinked hard, turning away, trying to steady my voice. "I will not bring my son into your world, a world where everything can be bought. Nothing is free." Julian's reply was soft. No. But some things are worth fighting for. He stood up, placed money on the table far more than the cost of a cup of coffee, and left the envelope behind. He walked out without looking back. I stood there, staring at the envelope as though it were glowing. And across the counter, Noah watched me with innocent, startling awareness, as if he understood somehow that we were standing at yet another fork in the road with no easy return. I did not open the envelope for 2 days. It lay quietly on the kitchen table beside the cereal box and the half-empty milk carton, like a fragment of some foreign world that had drifted accidentally into our tiny apartment. Each time I saw it, something inside me tightened curiosity, hope, and something like fear. I knew what was inside, an invitation, a key, a way out. But I also knew that if I opened it, I might step into a current I could never swim against. I did not trust men like Julian. I did not trust their world. And I especially did not trust kindness accompanied by wealth. On the 3rd morning, after taking Noah to the hospital for his routine checkup, I decided I would put an end to it. No more vague hopes. No more him weaving himself back into my life as a remorseful benefactor. I did not need redemption. I needed peace. I needed freedom. I needed to hold on to the small life I had built, in my own way. As soon as I entered the clinic, I saw Dr. Miller waiting. He smiled warmly, nodded to me, and bent to ruffle Noah's hair in the familiar way he always did. I sat down, trying to appear calm, but his very first sentence felt like a splash of icy water. "Claire, good news. The hospital received full funding to proceed with your expanded treatment plan. The entire cost has been prepaid through an anonymous charitable donation." I jerked my head up, my palms turning cold. "Who?" I whispered. Dr. Miller shrugged. "They left no name, only instructions that it was a special fund assigned specifically to your case number. No one else can use it," I knew instantly. I did not need to ask. It felt as if the blood drained from my face. My whole body went numb, as though I had just lost the last bit of control I thought I still had. I stepped out of the exam room, guiding Noah back to the waiting area, fury burning through me. I did not know how he did it, how he obtained my case number, but I knew with complete certainty. Julian had done this. Without asking, without telling me, without giving me a choice. That night, I stood by the living room window, watching the pale streetlights spill across the sill. Noah was asleep. I picked up my phone and opened the message he had sent with the envelope. Only one line. "If you need anything, call." I typed, "I did not want you to do that. I told you I did not need anything. I want to make my own choices. I am not an abandoned thing you pick back up when convenient." My thumb hovered over the send button, then I erased it all. Instead, I typed one word: "Why?" The message was marked as read almost instantly, but Julian did not answer right away. An hour later, when I had nearly convinced myself he would not respond, my phone vibrated. His reply appeared, as simple and devastating as his arrival into my life. "Because you do not deserve to die because you cannot afford treatment, and Noah does not deserve to lose his mother because you are too proud." I did not know when the tears started, only that my hand tightened around the phone, as though it were the only thing keeping me from being swept away by the storm inside me. I did not want to need Julian, but a part of me knew that no matter how many times I pushed him away, he would keep finding a way to stay. Not with promises, not with roses or diamonds, but by quietly cleaning up the debris of a world I had fought alone, for too long. And for the first time in many months, I felt something inside me grow lighter. Not because of the money, but because, perhaps, I no longer had to fight entirely on my own. Even if I was not ready to admit it, Julian came to see me on a Saturday morning while Noah was sitting by the window drawing, and I had just finished washing the tower of dishes piled in the sink. He did not call ahead, did not text, simply appeared at the doorway of my old ground-floor apartment with a steady, quiet gaze, carrying nothing but a seriousness that made my heart pound even before he spoke. I stepped into the hallway and pulled the door closed behind me so Noah would not hear the conversation. He stood there politely, not touching me, not attempting to cross the boundary of my space. "I want to ask you something," Julian said, his eyes never leaving my face. I nodded, trying to keep my voice even. "About the hospital bill? I know it was you." He shook his head gently. "Not that. I do not need." Your thanks, Claire. I only want to see Noah. I went still. Not because I was surprised, but because I had been waiting for that question since everything started shifting. I looked at him, searching for the truth behind his calm expression. Was it genuine longing or something deeper I could not yet name? Julian continued, his voice growing slightly rougher. I do not want to pressure you. I know you have done everything for him. But I am the boy's father, even if far too late. I would like the chance to be in his life, slowly, the right way. I folded my arms tightly across my chest, an instinctive shield. He spoke as if things could be simple, but they were not. I had spent 6 years building a world safe enough for Noah, a world where he did not have to worry about adults breaking promises, where having only me was enough. And now this man appeared, bringing with him wealth, power, and a past I did not fully understand. I do not know who you are, Julian. I do not know how dangerous your world might be. You could do something intentionally or not that drags my family into trouble we cannot escape. His voice softened, slow and careful, as if he were laying stones on fragile ground. I know I am not clean. I know you have reasons to be afraid. But I swear to you, Claire, I will never pull Noah into that part of my life. I built another world, a safer world. And I want to invite you and him to see it, just once, so you know I am sincere. I looked at him, torn and aching. I was not afraid he would hurt my child. What frightened me most was the possibility that Noah would love him, and that one day, my son would choose him. I would lose him not because Julian tried to take him, but because I would no longer be his entire world. That fear was something I had never admitted to anyone, not even myself. My voice slipped out low, trembling even as I tried to hold it steady. If I agree, if I give you a chance, everything changes. I will no longer be the only one making decisions for him. You will step into his life. And if you ever change your mind again, if you disappear like before, he will break. Julian nodded slowly, as if he had replayed that thought hundreds of times. If you let me in, I will not leave, I promise. And if you need me to put it in writing, I will sign anything. I stood there listening to the cold wind drift through the hallway, listening to Noah's soft laughter from inside when he realized the baby dragon he had drawn looked more like a cat. My chest ached. I nodded, very slowly. One time, just one visit, in a public place, and I will be there. Julian smiled for the first time since he arrived. Not a victorious smile, but one of quiet relief, almost gratitude. One time was already a beginning. But for me, every step toward him felt like gambling with the tiny world I had spent my youth trying to protect. The black SUV glided smoothly along the stone-lined road, winding between 2 rows of blazing red maple trees, its tires barely making a sound except for the whisper of wind. Noah pressed his face to the window, his small hands braced on the seat, his eyes shining as if he were stepping into the pages of the bedtime stories I used to tell him. I sat beside him, my back taut, my fingers clutching my purse strap as if something inside it could protect me from what waited ahead. And then the estate appeared. A white stone mansion perched on a hilltop, its slate-gray roof and wide balconies overlooking the endless sweep of Willamette Valley, dotted with vineyards and bathed in soft October sunlight like silk. The gates opened automatically as we approached. I felt the strange, uneasy sensation of crossing an invisible threshold into a place where everything was pristine, intentional, calculated into a world where I had never belonged. Julian greeted us at the main entrance. He wore a simple white shirt and dark jeans, looking more relaxed than I had ever seen him, though his presence still carried the weight of someone who naturally shifted the atmosphere around him. Noah ran to him immediately, without hesitation, his excitement bubbling like he had found an old friend. Julian crouched down, reaching out. "Say hello, son." Noah nodded eagerly. "Hi, Dad." The word Dad floated through the quiet air like a soft knock on a door, powerful enough to make my heart stumble. Julian blinked, his eyes flickering. Then he wrapped his arms around his son in a gentle embrace. No tears, no dramatic gestures. Just a quiet, honest moment that made me turn away so I could swallow the tightness rising in my throat. Inside, the house looked like something pulled from the pages of a high-end design magazine. Glossy walnut floors, abstract paintings on the walls, high ceilings with natural light pouring in through wide windows. I walked slowly, feeling like an intruder wandering through a world built for someone else. Julian guided us from room to room. The living room overlooked the vineyard. The kitchen gleamed with marble counters long enough to seat 8 people, and the oak-paneled library held every classic children's book he thought Noah might want to read. I said nothing, could not say anything. Everything was too perfect, too orderly, too impossibly clean, so much so that I felt like a blemish in a pristine photograph. He led us to the guest house behind the mansion, a 2-story cottage fully furnished with its own kitchen and large glass doors facing a lavender garden. This is yours if you choose to stay for a while. No conditions. No pressure. I did not respond. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching Noah run around the room, exploring every painting, every carved detail, asking question after question. A part of me softened, the part that had always been hard and guarded to protect him. Then my eyes fell on a framed photograph on the shelf. Julian stood beside a beautiful blonde woman in a white dress, both of them smiling with the kind of perfect ease that belonged to people who had never once worried about survival. My heart clenched. Teresa, his estranged wife. I remembered his words that they were separated, but the photograph reminded me she had once belonged to this place, while I was only a visitor who did not know where to stand. I stepped onto the balcony, inhaling deeply. Julian followed, keeping his distance. "You do not have to decide anything today," he said quietly. "I just want you to know you have a place here. You and Noah." I looked out over the valley, my thoughts tangled. I had grown used to waking in a damp apartment, to ambulance sirens outside the window, to breakfast made from cheap bread and peanut butter. And here was everything I had once convinced myself I did not need. But now, watching Noah laugh among the open green space, I was no longer sure. I did not know if I could trust Julian or if this was simply another chapter of a fairy tale I had stumbled into. But what I did know more clearly than anything was that, from the moment we stepped through those gates, our lives had entered a new chapter entirely, and there was no way back to the world we had known before. Noah adjusted to this place faster than anything I could have imagined. After only 3 days, he already knew the path from the guest house to the lavender garden by heart, remembered the gardeners' names, befriended the head chef in the mansion's vast kitchen, and developed a particular fondness for the reading room, with its window overlooking the small lotus pond behind the house. He remained the polite, careful child I raised, the one who knew never to touch what did not belong to him, but at the same time he was opening his heart with that natural innocence children possess when they feel safe. I watched all of it with a mixture of gratitude and unease. Something inside me twisted each time I saw Noah laughing in the sunlight, clutching the brand new remote control car Julian had given him. I had never been able to give him a world like this, and now I was terrified that he might forget the years when it had been just the two of us, even though I knew that fear was selfish. Julian never pushed me to change anything, but his presence was growing too familiar, too patient, too real. He did not offer grand promises or attempt to play the hero or the perfect father. He simply appeared every morning as Noah woke, sat with him at breakfast, listened as the boy described the strange dreams he had the night before. He let Noah choose his meals, read stories with him each evening, and occasionally looked at me with a tenderness so undeniable I had to turn away before my heart trembled. One evening, when I stepped onto the guest house porch to retrieve the mail, I saw him standing by the fence, staring at the vineyard. In the soft golden light spilling from the windows, he no longer looked like a cold corporate titan, but like a man trying to fill the void of 6 years of absence from his son's life. I walked toward him with cautious steps, unsure where I wanted the conversation to lead. He spoke first, without turning. "You think I am trying to buy affection, don't you?" I remained silent a moment before answering. "I think you are trying to do what is right, but what is right is not always what is best." He turned toward me, the light softening his eyes into warm amber. "Then what is best, in your view?" I exhaled slowly. What is best is letting Noah grow up in love without being torn between two worlds he cannot understand. It is not forcing him to choose when he is too young to know what choosing means. Julian nodded, carefully, as though he wanted every word to matter. "I have no intention of separating you from him. I have never thought of fighting for custody or bringing him to live with me alone. I only want to be here, to be his father, if you allow me." His voice was not pleading. It was simply honest, like he was placing a piece of his heart in my hands. I felt something soften inside me, not because of what he said, but because of how he lived it every day, quietly, without trying to control or reshape the way we already were. The next morning, I found Noah in the small workroom Julian had set up for him, holding up a watercolor painting with pride. "Mama, look, I painted our home. There is you, me, and Dad." I stared at the 3 simple figures, standing under a bright-colored roof. No crowns, no castles, nothing grand or glittering, just 3 arms linked together. And for the first time, I did not feel afraid of what might come next. Because perhaps peace was not a place where we controlled everything, but a place where we no longer felt compelled to resist what arrived with sincerity. I did not know when that feeling began. I only knew it was quiet, unhurried, spreading through me like warm sunlight filtering through leaves on a misty morning. Perhaps it was the day I woke to a cool breeze, stepped out of the guest house and found Julian on the front steps holding 2 cups of coffee, setting one beside him as though he had already grown used to waiting for me. Or perhaps it was when he bent down to tie Noah's shoelace, patient and gentle, as though he had been doing it for years. Or the night the 3 of us lay in the garden beneath a sky full of stars, and Julian told Noah stories about constellations like a father, who had studied them only to share them with a son he had known for barely a month. Whenever it began, I knew my heart was opening, slowly but undeniably. One late afternoon, while Noah toured the vineyard in a small electric cart with one of the staff, Julian poured me a glass of wine and motioned for me to follow him to the back terrace, where stone pillars were draped in blooming vines. He sat down, silent for a long moment as though weighing something heavy. Then he spoke, low and steady. "Have you ever wondered why I never mentioned Teresa anymore?" I looked at him, something unnamed rising quietly inside me. "I figured you would. Tell me when you were ready." Julian nodded. "I owe you an explanation. Teresa and I were not a marriage born of love. We knew each other since childhood, our families intertwined in business for decades. I once believed I could learn to love her or at least live in a calm marriage. But Teresa did not want calm. She wanted power, control, a defined position within the empire our families shared." He paused, eyes distant. "We separated after 2 years. No children, no connection. But on paper, for financial and corporate reasons, we remained tied. Teresa refused to divorce until every condition favored her. So I stayed silent, let her live her life, while I tried to live mine." He turned to me, his gaze touching the guarded part of me I had tried to keep hidden. "I met you at that gala, and for the first time in a long time, someone looked at me without seeing a headline or a bank account. You saw me as a human being, someone who could be tired, someone who could be lonely. I did not know what to say, only that something in my chest tightened. You were never a fleeting night, Claire. I left my business card for you, genuinely wanting to see you again. But someone on Teresa's private staff, who followed me everywhere at the time, secretly retrieved it the moment I stepped away. I did not learn that until half a year later, when she was fired for stealing personal information. By then, every trace of you had vanished." I swallowed, then asked softly, "Does Teresa know about Noah?" Julian shook his head. "No, and I do not intend for her to know. This is the family I am protecting now the way you have protected him all these years." I lowered my gaze, my fingers tightening around the glass as if holding something fragile cracking open inside me. Julian continued, voice gentling. "I do not expect forgiveness for disappearing, but I need you to know I never stopped thinking of you. And when I saw Noah, I knew I could not return to living a life driven only by obligation. I want to live for what still makes my heart feel alive, and that is you and our son." I lifted my eyes to his, and for the first time I did not look away. I did not know if love could return after heartbreak, but I knew sincerity had a language of its own. And in that moment, beneath the vine-draped terrace, I let myself soften, not because Julian was perfect, but because he was true, present, unguarded. And I began to believe that maybe the past was not a chain, but a foundation for something new built from trust and choice. After that night, I began to see everything through different eyes, not because I doubted him, but because trust is not easily rebuilt for those who have already been broken. In the following days, while Noah played happily on the estate grounds and Julian continued sharing meals, reading sessions, and quiet routines with us, something like a shadow began slipping into my awareness. Everything here was too perfect, everyone too polite. The staff never asked unnecessary questions, never stared, and sometimes the way they moved, spoke, or stood guard at the narrow road leading into the estate made me uneasy. One afternoon, walking with Noah near the vineyard's edge, I spotted a man beside a black SUV with no license plates. He wore a black suit, gloves, and sunglasses covering most of his face. He did not greet me, merely nodded and stepped back into the shadows as though he had never been there. I said nothing to Julian that night, but the quiet worry did not leave me. I began noticing more. The phone calls Julian left the room to answer, the hours he disappeared without explanation, and the third-floor room nobody entered, always locked and omitted from the mansion's floor plan he had shown me on our first day. Then one night, heading to the kitchen for water, I heard voices in the library. The door was ajar. I was about to leave when one sentence froze me. Westbrook will never let the Italians get near his own. A deep voice, firm, unfamiliar. Seems they have caught wind about the kid. Should we relocate? A pause. Then another voice responded. No, Claire is still here. We cannot risk anything until she decides. I felt cold sweep from my spine to my fingertips. I backed away from the hallway, heart hammering. They were talking about Noah, about me, about something larger than anything I had imagined. I did not sleep that night. Lying in bed, listening to Noah's soft breathing, I felt fear move through me like ice. There was something Julian had not told me, a world he still kept hidden, even after all the softness and sincerity he had shown. And I could not ignore the growing certainty that danger was no longer far away. It was already on our doorstep, stitched into every detail of this quiet, polished world. The next morning I tried to remain calm, brewed coffee as usual, but Julian sensed something immediately. Are you all right? He asked, his eyes narrowing. I nodded, just tired. He said nothing else, but his posture tightened as though he could feel something shifting. I took Noah outside to play, then made an excuse to return to the mansion alone. I walked straight to the third floor, to the always locked door. To my shock, it was unlocked. I pushed it open, my heart clenching. Inside was an office that would have appeared ordinary if not for the maps, scattered files and black and white photographs marking areas in Chicago, New York, and Milan. A picture of me from 6 years ago at the gala lay among the papers, and a photo of Noah taken from a distance in the park near our old apartment. I stumbled back, the air draining from the room, as though someone had pulled the ground out from beneath me. I did not know who Julian truly was. All I knew was that the man I was beginning to trust, the man I was slowly letting into my heart, stood at the center of a world I could never protect my son from. And if I did not act, if I kept trusting blindly, I might lose Noah forever. I left the estate, before the sky fully woke, when the air was still soaked with mist, and the first threads of light had not yet touched the crest of the hill. Noah was still asleep, his breath soft and even, and I pressed a kiss to his forehead before placing a small note beside his pillow, shaky words. I wasn't even sure he would understand. Mama loves you, my boy, and you will always be the best thing in her life. I did not let Julian know. I did not let anyone see me leave. I carried nothing but the old backpack I had used when Noah and I moved from one city to another, when I worked late diner shifts, and he slept curled on a booth bench under a thin blanket. I caught the earliest bus out of Willamette Valley and returned to the same aging apartment building where I had lived for 3 years before my illness shattered everything. Apartment number 3 had been empty for a long time, still carrying the faint smell of mildew, its chipped paint and creaking floorboards greeting me like ghosts of a life I thought I had outgrown. I rented it month to month with the little money I had left in my hidden account, the emergency funds I had kept tucked away for the day I might have to run. No one in the old building recognized me at first. They looked at me with unsure eyes, unable to place the thinner woman with hastily tied hair and circles beneath her eyes as the same Claire who used to smile, who used to help carry groceries when the elevator broke down. I did not want to explain. I just wanted to disappear, to pull myself out of a dream gone wrong before it swallowed me and my son whole. Shame lingered in me, not because of Julian's past, but because I had almost believed I could live in a world that was never meant for me. I had thought love could make everything simpler. I had thought sincerity alone could hold a family together. But no one can keep what was never theirs to begin with. And I, in the end, was still a woman who once made a mistake, who believed in a single, fateful night only to wander lost 6 years later, Each day in the old apartment felt like a distorted draft of the life I thought I had already survived. No Noah's laughter. No Julian's worried glance every time I coughed. No quiet breakfasts with warm coffee waiting and a steady gaze across a long table. Only me, the narrow bed, the endless drip of the pipes at night, and an emptiness too vast to name. I reached out to no one. I blocked Julian's number, deleted every message, turned off my phone at night so I wouldn't risk trembling when it lit up. But I couldn't delete memory. I couldn't stop replaying Julian sitting on the steps watching Noah draw, or the way his eyes lit with something unguarded when Noah called him Dad. I had taken that from them. I had cut short something that could have grown beautiful all because of fear, but I didn't know how else to protect us. Everything I had learned in life taught me to leave before being left. And now, once again, I was the one, walking away. 1 week passed, then 2, no knock at the door, no one asking where I had gone. I knew Julian well enough to understand he wouldn't send men to track me down or drag me back. He understood I needed time, but the farther I stayed, the weaker I felt, as though distance wasn't curing me but hollowing me out. A question began to circle inside me, relentless and exhausting. If I returned, what would be waiting behind that white stone gate? Another gamble? Or a final chance to forgive? And underneath all of that was the deeper question I wasn't brave enough to ask. Did I deserve it? A woman who doubted, who ran, who left her child tangled in silent confusion? I didn't know. I only knew I missed Noah so deeply that even breathing felt dry and sharp. And I missed Julian so much that I bit down on my lip each time the shape of him appeared in my mind. Maybe my deepest shame was not in the secrets I uncovered, but in how quickly I turned away from him when confronted with I chose retreat instead of conversation. And that was something I couldn't outrun, no matter how far I went. That night, the rain came, the wind slipping through the crooked window frame like the weary sigh of a house long abandoned. I sat on the bathroom floor, back against the cold tile wall, knees pulled to my chest, the shower head dripping rhythmically onto the cracked porcelain like a slow, numbing heartbeat. The light was dim, steam rising only to dissolve into the damp air. I didn't know how long I stayed there. When I finally noticed myself again, my whole body was shaking, lips turning purple, lungs tightening with each breath. The thin towel had slipped off my shoulders, my hair clung wet to my face, and my hands trembled so hard I could barely grip my phone. But I reached for it anyway, the last instinct I had left. I didn't know why I called Julian. I only knew I needed a voice, a warmth, something that didn't vanish the moment I touched it. The phone rang, twice, then 3 times. I nearly gave up, but then I heard him, his voice warm, alert, threaded with alarm. "Claire, what's wrong?" I couldn't speak for several seconds. Only the sound of dripping water and the wind moaning through the window filled the space between us. Then I heard myself whisper, "I'm so cold. I'm not okay." Maybe it was only a handful of words, but they tore through every shell I had worn to keep myself upright. Julian didn't ask questions. He said only one thing. "Stay on the line. I'm coming." I don't remember how much time passed, just that the bathroom door opened with a sharp metallic click, and he was there. Breath unsteady from running, eyes wild with fear barely held in check. He crossed the room in seconds, kneeling beside me, not touching at first, scanning me as though afraid even a gentle hand might make me break. Then he shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around me, pulling me close, his arm steady around my shoulders. "Claire, I'm here. You're safe now." I let him gather me into his chest, let the warmth from his coat seep into my shivering skin, let his hand move in quiet circles on my back like he was soothing a frightened child. I said nothing, only leaned against him and let the tears come my first since leaving the estate. Julian lifted me effortlessly, as though I weighed no more than one of the sorrows he had carried for years. He wrapped me in blankets, placed me gently on the edge of the bed, then went to warm water on the stove and found the small bottle of medicine I used during pain episodes. The dim, damp apartment felt warmer simply because he was in it. When I finally sat upright without swaying, Julian settled across from me. His eyes held no anger, no reproach, only something painfully sincere, so deep I had to look away. "You didn't want me to find you," I whispered, my throat raw. Julian shook his head slowly, like a breeze shifting a curtain. "But I did find you. I gave you time, but I never stopped watching over you." If you hadn't called tonight, I still would have come. I lifted my eyes, vision blurred. I don't know what to believe anymore. What I saw in that room, those men, the names, the maps. Julian took my hand gently, his voice low. I won't deny any of it. Yes, there were things I hadn't told you, because I didn't want you to be afraid. But I have never brought anything into your life, or Noah's, that could harm you. Those files you saw. Yes, I was once entangled in dangerous dealings in Europe. But Claire, I didn't just try to walk away. This morning, I signed the papers to sell my entire share of that operation. I accepted losing half of my fortune in exchange for complete freedom. I am only a vineyard owner now, a safe father to Noah. No one is watching us anymore. I swear it, I whispered. I'm not as strong as you think. I'm scared. Scared of losing my son. Scared of losing you. Scared I'll trust the wrong thing again. Julian leaned forward, placing his forehead gently against mine, his breath warm against my skin. You're allowed to be afraid, Claire. But don't be afraid alone. This time, let me be afraid with you. I didn't answer. I only nodded slowly, for the first time as though agreeing to something fragile and wordless. Because that night, in the old, weathered apartment with the smell of damp walls and the rain whispering outside, I realized that happiness was not the absence of pain. It was having someone step toward you, gather you close, exactly when you no longer had the strength to stand on your own. And that person, with all his contradictions, shadows, and quiet love, was sitting right in front of me. I returned to the estate on a soft, sun-washed morning after nearly 3 weeks of living like a shadow inside that musty old apartment, and Julian did not greet me with flowers or tender promises. He simply stood on the front steps watching me step out of the car, his gaze still and quiet like the surface of a lake untouched by wind. But when Noah ran toward me, shouting "Mama" in a burst of sunlight and joy, I knew I no longer had anywhere else to go. I didn't enter the main house. Instead, I asked to return to the guest house, the same place where I had stayed during those first fragile days. It wasn't because I didn't trust Julian. It was because I needed space for myself, a small corner of silence to stitch together the torn places in my heart after everything I had broken and everything that had broken me. Julian understood. He nodded and said only one simple sentence: "The house has always been there." From that day on, Noah and I lived in the little cottage by the lavender garden like a separate family, yet never abandoned. Julian didn't appear every day. He didn't demand explanations or ask me to make up for the weeks I had vanished. He simply existed nearby in a quiet, patient way only someone who has loved deeply can manage. Every morning, a paper bag with warm pastries and heated milk for Noah appeared on our doorstep. On some afternoons, when I wandered the garden clipping flowers or practicing meditation, I would sometimes catch Julian's distant gaze from the second-floor window of the main house, never avoiding me, never approaching, simply letting me know he was there while still respecting the distance I needed. Noah adapted faster than I imagined. He slipped back into his old routine, attending online classes in the mornings, then spending his afternoons in the garden or in the small guest house library Julian had remodeled into a private study space just for him. He didn't speak much about the days when I was gone, nor did he ask why I sometimes cried at night while holding him until he fell asleep. Children feel with their hearts. They don't need words to understand. I began healing through small things, through the breakfasts I cooked again with my own hands, through the flower pots I tended outside the porch, through washing our blankets myself instead of letting the staff take them. I needed to feel I was living my life again, not leaning on someone, not hiding behind anyone. But sometimes, when night settled over the hills and all the lights in the guest house were dimmed, I would glance toward the main house and see a faint glow coming from Julian's study. I knew he was still awake, still working, still carrying parts of a world I had never fully understood. And even without touching, even without those late evenings together under the stone veranda, I felt surrounded by an invisible kind of care. One afternoon I came down with a fever, not severe, but enough to make my limbs heavy and my breath short. I told no one. I planned simply to rest. But less than an hour later, a staff member arrived with fresh ginger, honey, and fever medicine, along with a small note in a familiar hand. "Rest. I don't need to see you pretending to be fine." I smiled at the message, and for the first time in weeks, I took the medicine without feeling like I was fighting the world alone. Julian was no longer the perfect man I once imagined. I had seen the shadows around him, the pieces of his life he had not spoken aloud. But it was his restraint, his willingness to give me distance, to never make me feel indebted, that made me begin to trust again, to believe in something larger than forgiveness. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring or what waited for Noah and me beyond that lavender-lined path, but in that moment, as I lay beside my son in the soft glow of the guest house lights, listening to the wind rustle through the purple blooms outside, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be, not because everything was solved, but because I had finally stopped running. And sometimes, that alone is enough of a beginning. I started writing again. Not long manuscripts or children's fairy tales like before, but short passages, fragments of thought scribbled into a small blue cloth journal. Every morning, after bringing Noah to the little library where his private tutor waited, I sat by the window with a warm cup of jasmine tea, my mind blank as an untouched page, until somehow, without effort, the words began to find their way out. I wrote about silence, about fear, about trust, and those unnamed things that persist in the heart like a low whisper that never fades. It became my way of speaking to myself, my way of untangling knots I had shoved into dark corners for years, foolishly believing they would vanish on their own, but nothing truly disappears. It waits until we are brave enough to come back and face it. I no longer counted days. I no longer stared at the calendar, marking each treatment as though counting down to a sentence. I no longer looked at Julian with the wary eyes of someone terrified of losing herself the moment he stepped closer. I began seeing him as a man not perfect, but steady, patient, and sincere. One day, while organizing my writing corner, I found an old birthday card Noah had made, the clumsy, crooked letters saying, "Thank you for telling me stories every night. I love you, and I know Dad somewhere will love you too." I read it again and again, and realized my son had seen love long before I had the courage to name it. And what touched me most was that he had never demanded anything from Julian, never asked what to call him, never assigned blame or expectation. He simply opened his heart the way children do when they feel safe. I placed the card on the window ledge where I usually wrote, and for the first time in many months, I prayed not for a miracle, but in gratitude for what I still had. That afternoon, I saw Julian at the old stables, stroking the back of a deep brown horse. He noticed me from afar, and instead of walking toward me as he often did, he simply lifted a hand in greeting and returned to what he was doing. I approached quietly, as though afraid to disturb the moment. The horse lifted its head, its dark eyes calm and noble. Julian handed me a carrot. I hesitated, then held it out. The horse brushed my palm with its warm tongue, and I burst out laughing. It had been so long since I'd laughed freely, not for anyone, not for any reason, only because I suddenly felt alive again. Julian watched me, silent but softened, his gaze like a low, steady note in a forgotten melody. I spoke first. "I think I've forgiven you, not because I've forgotten, but because I no longer want to hold on to the things that hurt." Julian didn't answer immediately. He placed a hand on his chest, over the slow, steady beat beneath his slightly wrinkled shirt. He said, "If you ever asked what scares me most, it's losing the chance to see you live without having to fight everything alone." I didn't respond, not because I lacked words, but because every answer I had was already inside the choices I was beginning to make. That night, I rested my hand on Julian's shoulder as he stood in the kitchen preparing dinner for Noah. He turned, a little surprised, but said nothing. I looked into his eyes and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Julian didn't pull me into his arms. He simply nodded and continued chopping vegetables, as though that small gesture was all the reply either of us needed. And for the first time, I accepted his love not through fear of breaking, but with gratitude for someone patient enough to love a heart that had once been shattered. The day I received my test results, the sky was an impossible blue, not the somber gray I had grown used to in autumn, but a vast, open sweep of color with soft sunlight drifting over the trees that had already turned gold, as if the world itself wanted to whisper something gentle to me. I stepped out of the hospital with the unopened envelope still in my hand, my heart strangely calm and tangled all at once. Julian was waiting in the parking lot. He had offered to come with me but hadn't insisted on entering the exam room. I needed that moment. For myself, one last stretch of the journey, I had to walk alone, before I could open my heart completely. When I slid into the seat beside him, he didn't ask. He simply looked at me with those deep brown eyes that held no urgency, only a quiet patience wrapped in respect. I took a long breath, opened the envelope, and when my eyes traced the neatly printed lines on the page, my fingers trembled. I turned to Julian, my lips unsteady, my voice barely a whisper. I'm in remission. Not cured, but stepping into a new chapter. A chance to live without counting down to every follow-up appointment, every treatment cycle. Julian didn't speak. He gathered me into his arms, holding me tightly enough to keep me anchored in a world I once feared would slip away before I had the chance to stand firmly in it again. I didn't cry the way I thought I would. I only rested my head on his shoulder, letting relief wash through me like a tide I hadn't dared to hope for. All those months of living, with illness, with fear, with the quiet terror that my child might grow up without a mother, I had never allowed myself to imagine remission as something real. Yet there it was, resting in my hands as clearly as a vow, and only then did I understand that some good things demand a long walk through pain before we can reach them. Julian drove me back to the estate. Noah was in the library, and when he saw the car pull in, he came running out, eyes bright. Mama, are you okay?" I pulled him into my arms, holding him so tightly it felt as if letting go would make everything vanish. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I won't have to go to the hospital so often anymore." Noah squealed with joy, threw his arms around my neck and whispered, "So you can tell me bedtime stories every night without getting tired." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. Through this entire journey, he had carried the heaviest burden without ever complaining. How could I not be grateful for that? Dinner that evening was a small celebration, no cake, no wine, just simple roasted chicken, vegetables, and the soft glow of candlelight. Julian sat across from me, Noah in the middle humming an old tune about stars and wishes. I looked at the two people who shaped my world, one grown, one small, and my heart filled with something for which I had no name. Perhaps this was what hope felt like, or peace, or the permission to believe that tomorrow might indeed be kinder. After Noah fell asleep, Julian and I stepped out onto the guest house porch as we always did. The night breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of lavender. I turned toward him and finally spoke the words I had carried quietly since reading the results. "I didn't think I would live long, Julian. There were moments when I prepared everything, even letters for Noah to read someday." Julian didn't interrupt. He only listened, his gaze steady on my face. "But then, I didn't die. I'm still here, and I think, for the rest of my life, I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want to live with my child, with myself, and with you." Julian gently took my hand, offering no dramatic vows, only a light squeeze that told me he was opening his heart alongside me, that in the place where two wounded souls meet, there might still be room for love to exist. I leaned into his shoulder, feeling the last of the distance between us fall away. No more secrets, no more doubts, only one truth as clear as the sky that morning. I am alive, and I am loved. It was a fresh, tender morning the next day, warm enough to soften the air, but not so bright that it made me squint. After sending Noah off with his tutor, Julian appeared without warning, walking into the small garden behind the guest house with his hands in his coat pockets and a softness in his eyes I hadn't seen before. I was watering the lavender when he stopped a few steps away, not too close, just near enough for me to hear him when he said he wanted to take me somewhere. I looked up, surprised, but not hesitant. Over the past weeks, we had settled into a quiet harmony free of old questions about trust or boundaries, just two people learning how to walk beside each other without stepping on old wounds. Julian drove down a narrow path behind the vineyard, a place I had never seen. The landscape shifted as tall trees gave way to a winding gravel road, and finally, there it was, a 2-story wooden house nestled in a small valley, surrounded by a white fence and blooming rose bushes. My breath caught at the sight of it, my heart thudding with something I couldn't name. Julian parked, opened my door, and walked ahead to the steps. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key with a brass tag engraved with my name. He turned back to me, his voice gentle and steady. "Claire, this is your home. I thought I had misheard." I looked at him, then at the house, the white door, the wide sunlit windows, the vines climbing the porch, all of it, unfamiliar and strangely familiar at once. He spoke again. "I found this place a long time ago, but I never dared imagine you would be ready to accept it. This is not compensation, not a condition, not an apology. This is freedom, a place that belongs only to you. Not under my name, not tied to my assets, not connected to anything that ever made you feel small or indebted. I stepped up one stair, my vision blurring with emotion. I don't know what to say. Julian smiled softly. You don't have to say anything. Just live here, in whatever way you choose. If there comes a day you no longer want me beside you, this house will still be yours. And if you want to build something new, then let this be the beginning. I held the key, feeling my pulse trembling against the metal. For so many years, I had been caught between two fears, the fear of being tied down and the fear of being left behind. But this gift, carrying a tenderness deeper than any apology, made me realize that freedom isn't about running far. It's about having a place where you can stay without being controlled. We stepped inside. The house smelled of fresh wood, sunlight spilling through wide windows, furniture simple but warm, and paintings of flowers, landscapes, and even a small one depicting Noah and me in the park last autumn. I touched the frame, overwhelmed. I can really live here, I asked, as though I still needed proof. Julian nodded. There are no documents binding you to anything. The house is in your name, entirely. You can change it, paint it, replace every piece of furniture, as long as you feel at home. I turned to him, the man who had entered my life through a mistake and stayed through a gentleness I never believed I deserved. I didn't say I love you. Not because I didn't feel it, but because real love sometimes lives not in words but in the place where someone chooses to put you. I took his hand, making no promises, offering only a firm, grateful hold, a thank you, and Ensa's acknowledgement, a step forward without fear. And there, in that place where I finally had the right to choose, I felt truly free for the first time in years. I moved into the new house on a quiet Saturday morning, without celebration or fuss, just Noah and Julian helping me carry a few small boxes. Noah ran in circles around the living room on his tiny feet, shouting with delight that he would choose the bedroom with the biggest window so he could see the morning sunlight slip in every day. I watched him, gratitude filling every corner of my heart. The days that once felt impossible to survive now faded behind me like a blurred dream, and every moment in the present felt more sacred than ever. Julian did not stay the night. He took Noah back to the estate so I could settle everything in whatever way felt right. But before leaving, he placed his hand on my shoulder, his gaze steady and quiet, and said that if I needed anything, I only had to call him, even in the middle of the night. I nodded, my heart falling still in its gentle rhythm. I did not tell him I loved him, not yet, but I knew the feeling was no longer something vague or frightening. It was growing slowly each day, built through his unspoken presence, his quiet care, and the way he never tried to change me, but simply waited. A week later, I invited Julian for dinner. For the first time since I learned I was ill, I prepared the entire meal myself, not for anyone, not to prove anything, but because I wanted to share this fragile peace with the man who had stood by me at my weakest. The dinner was simple roasted chicken with lemon sauce, mashed potatoes, steamed vegetables, and an apple pie baked from my mother's handwritten recipe. Julian sat across from me, and the candlelight reflected on his face in a way that made my heart tremble slightly. Noah was joyful as always, eating while talking about the library, the story of a lost kitten, and the new guard at the gate who was very good at imitating owl sounds. I listened and felt a warmth rise inside me, something gentle and familiar. After dinner, when Noah had fallen asleep in his own room, I poured 2 glasses of wine and invited Julian to sit with me on the porch. The night was peaceful, the breeze carrying the scent of the flowers I had recently planted. I looked at him, hesitated for a moment, then gathered all the courage I had been holding inside. I told him I had thought long and hard about everything that had happened, about the way he had stepped into our lives, and about all the things we had not dared to name. Julian did not rush to answer. He only waited for me to continue. I said that I used to think love had to be dramatic and loud, but the older I became, the more I realized that true love was the peace of being with someone around whom I didn't have to be strong all the time. I told him I did not know when he started loving me and that maybe I did not need to know, because all I wanted to say was that I loved him. I loved him in my own way, slowly, cautiously, but sincerely and completely. Julian did not speak. He simply placed his glass on the small wooden table, stood, and pulled me into his arms. His embrace no longer felt unfamiliar or restrained. He kissed my forehead gently and whispered, his voice roughened by emotion, that he had waited a long time for those words and that he had never stopped loving me, no matter where I went, even if I left 100 more times. We stood there in silence, two souls once broken now slowly mending within each other. There were no boundaries between the past and the present, only a single truth that we chose each other, not out of obligation or circumstance, but because we had lived enough to recognize where we belonged. And from that moment on, we were no longer pieces adrift. We were a family, a real family. 1 year later, the small wooden house in the valley was no longer simply a shelter for me and my child, but had become the true home of a family. Our mornings began with Noah's laughter and the soft babbling of the newborn baby girl named Lily. Dr. Miller called her a medical miracle, because after the harsh treatment regimen I had undergone, the chance of motherhood was nearly zero. But life always keeps a tender exception for us when we least expect it. Julian held Lily in his arms, and every time he looked at her, he could not hide the mix of wonder and pure happiness in his eyes. I often sat quietly watching them, 3 people who had once been lost, finding each other again not by magic but through love and patience. Our family meals now had 4 people, the sound of spoons tapping bowls, the playful babbling of children, and someone laughing when Noah retold the story he had made up while playing in the garden. Life no longer needed to be perfect. It only needed to be enough to let me wake each morning knowing I was living with a real purpose. I kept writing not for work, and not for escape, but for myself, and for all the women who once believed they could not go on. Every sentence carried a piece of the path I had walked, the tears, the pain, and the light at the end of what once felt like an endless darkness. Julian continued his work but returned home earlier, spending more time with us. We did not need grand promises, only the commitment to be present for one another when it mattered, like the night I could not sleep because Lily had a slight fever. Julian did not offer solutions or speeches. He simply held me close while our daughter slept in both our arms. This story may not have begun like a fairy tale, but its ending is something I believe everyone deserves. Not everyone meets the right person at the right moment, but when love is genuine, no matter how late it arrives, it will always find its way home. Sometimes happiness is not found in perfection but in the courage to forgive, to trust again, and to open our hearts after being wounded. The story of Claire, Julian, Noah, and little Lily is a reminder that in a world full of uncertainty, love, kindness, and steadfastness can still create miracles. If you have listened this far, thank you for walking through this emotional journey with us. How does this story make you feel? Is there something in it that reflects your own life, or makes you pause and think? We would be grateful to hear your thoughts from the deepest place in your heart. Please leave a comment below and share your perspective, because every reflection is a precious gift to us. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and share it with your loved ones so they can also experience these meaningful, heartfelt, and deeply human stories every day. Don't miss the next chapters, because somewhere in another story, you may find a piece of yourself. Thank you, and see you in the next video. Wishing you good health, joy in your everyday life, and peace within your heart. Goodbye, and see you again soon.